Let's shift into the next issue in the interest of time here, and that's dining halls and food options in the dining halls. Again, I encourage you to think about the internal part of the issue, like the behavioral, the external part of the issue, the individual part, and the collective, right? There's these tensions that are going on all the time between those four entities. So, do you want to tee it up? Talk a little bit about it? What did you see as the tensions, trade-offs? What are you struggling with? All that good stuff.
I guess I have a few things that I'd be really interested to hear about. So the barrier we've always seen whenever in years past a student-oriented approach dining and culinary services is there's sort of an institutional friction, at least in our minds, whether that's justified or not, I have no idea. But that it's a very difficult thing to do. And so on one end, I'd be interested to hear sort of what do you see who are involved in procuring food for the university? What are the barriers you see to bringing locally sourced produce or other items into our food city, like the dining halls or cafes and everything here? Then the next part of that would be kind of in line, what sort of projects have you tried on campus? Have you seen stuff that works? Is there a certain type of project that works versus others that have proven to be fruitless, so to speak? And then I don't want to load on too many questions here, but it would be great at some point if we could touch on what sort of student initiatives, student behavior changes from like the student body, what would be able to drive this sort of change, bringing local food into our homes.
There's a number of food and procurement people here, right? Yeah.
Can I just add maybe a few more questions, pressure out?
I'd like to see your questions and raise you.
Exactly. I'll raise you three more. Questions in working in this, and I won't be long-winded. This is certainly my area of expertise and also my area of passion, but I'll keep that under control for this fight. Throwing out three questions that I think we need to add some clarification to a really complex issue. The first question would be and I'm asking this of maybe the student groups in particular, what do you consider local? I think we need to put some boundaries on it. Is it the upper Midwest? Is it Wisconsin? Is it Dane County? Is it North America? What do we want to consider local? Because I think that'll play into what the others who are actually doing the purchasing and such, how they might answer some of these questions. Would you be willing to pay more for it? This is the second question. From an agricultural production standpoint, for any of you that attended the Growing Dilemma seminar series, I see a few of the students in here. We had a seminar on ag in the middle, what happened to mid-size agriculture in the United States. And if you looked at the numbers that the producers that were on the panel provided, the producer that grew at what you would consider a moderate to large size farm, grossed about $500 an acre. The producer that owned 18 acres in Dane County, just outside of Madison, and grew diversified vegetables, grossed $20,000 an acre. So you come down to sheer economics and a scale or a magnitude of change that's quite large. I'm just being very honest on what it takes to pay the taxes in Dane County inside and own land and farm in that way. The third question would be, would you consider fresh produce the only local food? What about locally sourced and locally or minimally processed? And this gets into the food hub discussion. What if we have a co-processing facility shared by many different producers and handlers of food that could process food, but it's processed, so that's the complexity of food. There are many that don't like processed at all.
Tom?
I just have a friendly amendment to Jed's second question. Would you be willing to pay more? I have two students here right now. Two of my kids are on campus. So as you answer that, think from your parents' perspective. You guys may be very willing to pay more. Would your parents be willing to pay more?
As a parent also, I accept his amendment.
Can I just throw in too, just from the context of sustainability too, like, economic sustainability, like how much more can we pay where it is truly an economic, it's satisfying that area of sustainability.
That's a good segue. That would actually open that question up a little bit more, rather than just say, should it be local or not? But how do we promote sustainability? Maybe local is the answer, maybe not. I've actually been remarkably well-educated by this guy right here about things that I knew nothing about a few years ago, just having conversations with Jed about different sustainability metrics in our agricultural enterprise. It's pretty remarkable. My only suggestion is that we ought to think not just as it should be local or not, but how can we promote sustainability in the way that we look at our food system? How can we reduce energy consumption, the emissions? How can we promote health? How can we keep it economical and practical? And that's the way I would frame the question, just a little differently. Not necessarily the local or not, but how can we promote sustainability? I just ask you to think about that. The question a little bit more.
So frame it a little broader. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, so obviously Slow Food UW is all about sourcing locally. So as far as it goes through, I understand like there's definitely a difference between us sourcing for a cafe for 200 people once a week, where we can actually go to the farmer's market and interact with the farmers, versus sourcing for a variety of locations on campus every day. But I think as far as the how can you keep it practical, I think it's not so much, I think for this scale it's not an emphasis on, I think, sourcing within our region is important, but I also think as far as keeping it practical, it's important to think about who are the people we're purchasing from, and do they represent like growing practices and social issues that we want to support as a campus. So selecting farmers and growers that represent sustainable practices and aren't hiring labor workers that aren't making minimum wage to grow the food is also something you should be keeping in mind. So Slow Food UW represents social justice as well as environmental justice, because we're working with farmers, because that's a direct way to know that we are supporting them and their practices and in the most direct way, versus a large corporation that has migrant workers producing chemically grown vegetables.
So the local farmer itself is to you like it becomes an easy way to tell. This
Yeah.
is local, this
And
is
I think
sustainable, this is...
In my mind, I define local in a sense that can I interact with my producer? So knowing directly where my food is coming from, even if it's not, from Wisconsin, it's local in the sense that I can talk to the farmer about their growing practices. So if it's a cooperative like Organic Valley, understanding what their standards for producing are is part of that bridging the gap in the commodity chain of food on campus, I think.
Okay, so
Yeah, right. Keep it
to
going.
follow up with a related question though, and I think those are really important values. I described in many of those, but I'd ask a question. If you were willing to do that, would you be willing to do that if the energy cost was twice? And we committed twice the greenhouse gas emissions? Where's the, and I don't know if that's true, I'm just saying.
I think
how's
that you're gonna find it hard
practical?
to do that if you are, sourcing, so if you're,
I don't know.
sourcing meat, usually it's, grass-fed, so that is automatically lower emissions, because, it doesn't have the energy waste of, CAFOs or confined animal feeding operations, so it's more of a cyclical environmental cycle that's supported through eating food that is sustainably raised, so.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
have you looked at the whole, I think just we need to look at the whole picture.
Yeah,
Yeah, is there have people done good life cycle analysis on these kinds of things and show?
in my opinion, sourcing, I think a lot of the food comes from Cisco, and so we're getting a lot of, I don't know how green it is to be sourcing vegetables through them that probably are coming from California. So just the green energy from, shipping the distance between, Wisconsin and California, I think is,
We get shipped on a 747, right?
yeah.
I wonder if that makes sense.
They could, very well could. So there's a volume question at scale. Can you get enough locally sourced food to feed this many folks? There's a cost question.
Yeah. And I think,
There's a trade-off question.
it's not going to be just like a one, all of a sudden we're going to go completely local and sustainable. It's more of like a progression. So offering, once a week even in the cafeterias, a local sustainable option for the dining halls would be a great start. And gauging interest, gauging whether or not that's actually feasible through like a weekly thing is more important than just going full out and then being like, that's not going to be feasible. So.
Yeah, I think, one more, and then we'll come over to the first side here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm Mariana, by the way. I'm with Blitzburg, working mostly on the Bottle Free Battery campaign, but I don't think news about it. And I think this ties back into the behavioral change, and how this isn't just something about like local and sustainable food, but it's also just about the amount of diversity that we have as food and how we become accustomed to having avocados, bananas, star fruit, all of this food that just doesn't come from even North America, and how we can't continue to consume all this food that we love so much, but the expense is being shipped overseas into our country, and how this needs to become into something that people know where this is coming from, and people know like the cost of having guacamole for lunch. And I think that is present this morning.
To being more aware.
I think depending on the category of foods that we're purchasing, is how we decide what locally. Dairy is very easy. I mean, Wisconsin dairy state, all our cheeses and milks, all those lines pretty much come from Wisconsin. Meat, the same thing. All our meats basically come from Wisconsin, from local producers. When you get produce, it depends on the time of the year. February, I'm not going to find lettuce in Wisconsin. Salad butter in my salad, so that can fluctuate at times. At athletics, and I think at housing and meeting, we try to use as much fresh product as we can, so that limits us a little bit as to how much local items we can purchase. We were talking about this the other day in food and beverage meeting, so you know I was coming to this, and we thought if you included beer and hops and barley, we're way up there as far as local stuff is concerned. There's a lot of local grains and stuff that they use. But I think we try to do the best we can. We have a lot to learn yet. I think we'll all admit that. There are things that we could learn as what's local, what's not local. He brings up a good point, Wisconsin, Dane County. The legislature, the last 2-3 years, tried to put a definition onto that so they could kind of regulate what we purchase, and they haven't been able to do it. So it's something everybody's thinking about.
Are there alternatives seasonally to things like, obviously lettuce is not going to grow outside of Wisconsin. Do you use kale or what else?
I think a lot of that, so I'm one of the cooks for the cafe every week, and so cafe specifically is really focused on seasonality for the menus, and obviously we've had some really strange menus where it was all root vegetables, in March, because that's when things start getting really rough because storage vegetables are going out and there's nothing fresh, but it's very feasible, but it's going to take more innovation for it. It's not, it's not as obvious as saying we're going to serve hamburgers with tomato and lettuce on them, and then, so it requires, I think, education about why you're not, as you said, why you're not having avocados and guacamole or on your sandwich, and understanding that there's a limit if you're going to, support this kind of movement.
So this is a great example of attention. There's this need that some people have to have a consistent menu year-round. And then there's maybe an environmental footprint that says very much otherwise. And how do you navigate that in terms of education, economics, etc.? That's a very distinct example.
And I think that's, so I'm also an FH King, so we focus, between Slow Food and FH King, I think we focus a lot on that education of the food system. So I think a majority of students on campus are probably completely unaware that there are food system issues. And that's something that I try to keep in mind as far as when you say, like, are people willing to spend more? And so it's obviously going to take a realignment of, well, if I'm, like, personally, I'm willing to spend more, but that means I'm spending less, you know, on clothing or something like that, because I find it more worthwhile to invest that. So I think my parents would be okay with me saying that I spend less on clothing and more on food. I don't know how you guys would feel, but
So Daniel?
I just have a question.
yeah.
I'm trying to just understand whether it's a question of an either or is it more of a balance?
Yeah.
Let me sort of explain it. So I have this need to have guacamole, as an example. I like it.
He does.
Does it then mean that I'm not sustainable in my practice that I get it? Or is it a sense of being aware of what that is and then, or is it, should I just get rid of it altogether at those times of the year? And I think that's, I'm kind of trying to raise the question of is there
Yeah.
a case of balance here or not?
I ate guacamole this weekend, and so, like, I'm fine. You know, I think it's just a understanding that when I buy avocados, that they're being sourced from Mexico. And so, you know, it's like, I'm going to make guacamole rarely, if that. But I think going off, I'm going to, like, do the Bill McKibben, like, understanding that actual cost of that, I think is really important. That's going back to the awareness. So I don't choose to only eat avocados because I realize that I'd rather support, you know, local producers and make choices, despite the fact that sometimes I want bananas, you know, buying local fruit is going to be a better choice, especially when it's in season. But I don't think it's going to be, you know, get rid of apples, but maybe when they're available in Wisconsin, making sure that we're taking advantage of that. So.
Chad and then Parker?
Yeah.
Chad, you're first.
Yeah, just a couple of quick observations from this meeting, as well as a lot of similar work with other institutions consulting in this area and such. For example, the school districts. A lot of similar type discussions. One, when it really comes down to what I'm hearing today, that awareness piece, what it really comes down to is it seems people prefer transparency in their food. It doesn't necessarily have to be local, but you want to know where it came
Yeah.
from and maybe something about who produced it and the environment in which it was produced and what the trade-offs were with having guacamole in May in Wisconsin or April. So transparency in food is one. The other piece that I would offer as things come to scale, concentrate on what we're good at. We're number 2 in vegetable processing. That's why I asked about fresh. We're number 2 in vegetable processing in Wisconsin. We produce 40% of the nation's snap beans, 60% of the nation's cranberries, 3rd in potatoes, top 5 in onions, cabbage. We should be eating krauts every day. It's Wisconsin. Concentrate on what we're good at. So the conversation about lettuce and dining halls at scale in January is a difficult one. But I can guarantee you can get potatoes for very cheap right now that are very close to Wisconsin.
So we have Parker and then a couple more here, then we'll start moving in. Yeah. Food's going to be hot, we understand.
How much? Yeah. Going off of then what Paige and Jed both just spoke to, I would kind of drag this perhaps towards Julie. What have you guys looked into initiatives trying to show when I walk up to the hot bar counter, where are those items coming from? Like the salad bar, where is this lettuce sourced? I know like if you go to Metcalf's is a great example, that they really are focusing on that food miles, transparency like you said. And I'd just be curious to know, what sort of initiatives are you guys doing?
That's a very good question for me, because quite frankly, housing that is an area I deal with personally in the job foods. And it is something that we hope to work on in the next year in terms of telling the story of where the food that we've got in our lines is coming from and a bit more about it. Another thing I wanted to take the opportunity to share is that University Housing Dining this past year has probably gone through the most unprecedented change I've ever seen in a lot of years, in that we opened the Gordon Dining and Event Center and Four Lakes Market. We unraveled every system we had in terms of ordering food, making food, everything. And had a fairly successful year doing that. To get those places open, we're feeling good about the service we're delivering, the product we're delivering. I was very glad to hear Tom's comment about parents, because that is a customer group those of us that work in housing serve, as well as the students. And it's very important that we're managing students' money thoughtfully. And that's part of this equation too, so I was glad to hear Jeff's comment. So as far as local initiatives, we hope to get into more and telling us and labeling the food more. Yes, we can do more of that and intend to. That's one of our summer projects. Interestingly enough, even though we had all this going on in this past year, we pulled the metrics by the way we measure on local sourcing, and we found out that our percentage went up, and we weren't even pounding the pavement, deliberately going after everything. We were doing our business as we always did our business, in terms of best product we can get to serve our customer base. And that just happened because we were on no deliberate campaign. We just knew we couldn't deal with that in the past year. We had to focus on other things.
Time for maybe a couple of comments.
Just maybe to some of the points being made, institutional food service doesn't mean that you're not going to have good quality food served to you. And I think it's a testament to all of our food service units that they do a really great job of putting really quality food on the table. From a procurement perspective, one of the biggest challenges they have and we have is the sustainability of the sourcing of the product. It's great to be able to go to the farmer's market and pick up your tomatoes, but even a small farm can't sustain the sourcing the housing needs to feed as many people as pass through the university daily eating their food. So maybe to Jed's point, one of the things locally that would be really great is there was a way to bring small farmers product to some larger distribution channel that was accessible, because otherwise we really have to lean on some of the supply sources that their sourcing is doing to bring enough product to the university to serve everybody. So it's just a challenge.
Well, just a couple of things. Just a shout out to housing. When I was a student here, I can't tell you how much the food has changed today. So you guys have done a tremendous job turning things around, and the menu and the options now and the locally sourced and the organic options are completely different. And I wish Carl Kors from the union was here today. I was telling this. We worked with the unions on both their building projects, and we did a student survey that, unless you're a grad student, you may not have participated in, because it was about 5 years ago. But we asked every student on campus what they wanted to see in their Union South meeting, and knowing they were doing Memorial Day Community. And a lot of pressure to put and add locally sourced products, and that's why Harvest Grains in Union South is there. And we try very hard, or I should say Carl, that's his passion is to try to find locally sourced things, fair trade coffee. And the students also wanted pizza, and they wanted burgers, and they wanted fries. And a lot of that can come off of a Cisco truck, if you will. But they do look for the meats and the things offered now, just like housing does. So I think both of those two heavily student-driven venues on campus have done a lot of good work. But one thing I was wondering for this group, if you, kind of going back a couple conversations ago, and I was trying to get in, was I'm having a hard time just understanding the definition that you guys have, and I'm not sure what local really means, and I've heard local, I've heard regional. but organic or maybe not organic and not factory farm, but we do have local factory farms. So it might help to just even educate us a little bit more on your definition of the problem and what you're trying to accomplish. And last, I'll just touch on, I think, Jed, you mentioned the K-12 issue. So I have young children now in public schools, and they are capped at a model. So I think I pay $1.95 per hot lunch if they want hot lunch. And most of the times my kids won't take hot lunch because it comes on a Cisco truck. But the school districts are starting to do a better job at looking at locally sourced, and that usually means the apple they offer. Okay? And that's not a balance. You can't make a balanced meal just eating apples all day long. We all know that. So one thing would help too is, what does it mean to be locally sourced, or what your program is in Wisconsin year-round, and what foods are available to help support your mission. And Craig maybe mentioned the carbon footprint, or somebody did. Understand the whole picture of what does the transportation mean, what is the farming energy cost, and what is the waste produced by that, because when you look at factory farming and their footprint, and the same amount of cattle raised grass-fed beef, it's a drastic change in the land use. So then you start looking at, well, what's the land use model impact on that? So it's a really complex problem. And I applaud you guys for taking this on. It's just not about buying lettuce year-round. It's much greater than that. It's a really tough issue. But I appreciate what you're doing, because I enjoy the food offerings on campus, in part because students have asked for this for a long time, and it's finally here. So great job.
Anything else to add before we move to the next issue? You haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, Alan Franklin with the Greenhouse Community here. I just have two comments. And I walked in late stories and covered this, but as to this idea of sort of collecting into a channel before feeding into the production purchasing, I know that there are some movements on campus to do that. Right now, Jack Kloppenberg is working with Jeff Orr, the executive chef at Housing, to do just that. And I think that they're making progress and hoping to actually have that connection made this summer and into next fall. So I think there's some concrete movement that we'll see. And it might be one step of many, but it's coming. So I think a lot of those ideas are coming together around that. And the second thing that Julie mentioned earlier, and I think could be an important slice of this, is this idea of maybe not just locally sourcing, but university sourcing. And Julie mentioned the greenhouse is a potential. I think that's one tiny potential. But I would even think, like, Jed, how many of your colleagues in horticulture or plant pathology or agronomy that are doing field trials would maybe have food that they could connect to the university that is really neatly packaged in a way that it's not just about, like, we're not just growing food. It's like we're also growing world-class research. We're growing education for the undergraduates and graduates who are involved in those systems. And so, like, now we're talking not just about a supply chain, but a food system inside of the university environment that we have. And I think insofar as we can capitalize on those kind of systems that have so many different advantages and inputs, chance for students to get involved on every end, from the production to the distribution to the processing to the eating, that to me is a super money area where we could go. And I think there are some small pools of money that are starting to get put together on campus to sort of move towards this idea of a university farm, quote unquote. And it's, you could say, well, hasn't FHK been doing that? Well, absolutely. They totally have been doing that for 20 years, but it's just like, but where's the institutional support behind that? It's lagging, and it's starting to come, and I think a lot of the demand that we're hearing from students is the root cause. But not just for food, there's also tons of demand for the educational opportunities. I also help supervise and manage a graduate program called agroecology, and every year we have top tier students from all around the country who are interested in urban food systems, regional food systems, and it's really it's problematic sometimes for me to connect them with the meaningful opportunities on campus. And I think all these problems are related, and that there's so much demand from so many directions to start interrogating and creating some of these opportunities that we could really make some good movement with departments and colleges on campus being involved in some of this sort of university sourcing. I think there's big gains to be had there, even though it might be a small percentage of the food that we're eating on campus.
Yeah, one more comment, then we're going to move on.
Yeah, my name's Nick. I'm with Student Over Rethink Wisconsin, so with Aaron over there. I just wanted to go back to Angela's question, because I think it's a really important one about what is local. And I think you'll find that maybe a lot of us, just like a lot of you, probably define that differently. But I think your question is important because I see a lot of signs on campus, especially from We Can Serve, promoting these kinds of issues that we're talking about today. And one of those ones actually is Badgers eat locally grown food. So I know Farm Mars isn't here. He probably would be the best to answer that. Maybe Professor Benson, you want to answer that. But how would the university define locally grown food? Since you're asking us, I'd just like to hear what you have to say about that.
I'm not going to answer that question because I don't know the answer.
I don't know.
But I would like to share, because I think you're asking a really good question. How do we define it? One thing I just wanted to share is one of the things that we're trying to do on campus is our students, you're here to learn, educate yourself, you come in at a certain point and leave at another point. One of the things that our office is trying to do is provide the resources for faculty like Jed to develop curriculum for you to be able to make good choices for yourself. So this issue about awareness and transparency, about really being able to make a thoughtful decision about what is local and what does that mean? What is the footprint associated with that? One of the things that I want to see as a company is provide the students who have a lot of passion with the knowledge as well to be able to really make these thoughtful choices for the rest of their lives. So you'll see more curriculum like that rolling out as you go forward. I just encourage you to soak up as much of that as you can. All right.